hello, come in. Hi, come through. Nice to see you. You find me about to ascend the library steps. It's a very nice set of library steps that Maggie, my wife, gave me, and my daughter helped me to put together. Anyway, I'm doing so perilously because I have to have high shelves because there's not much room in the study. But because the Tolkien is up here, the big 3-volume one with the lovely Alan Lee and John Howe illustrations. So I'm getting this down and now prepared to read. I like library steps, that's a good thing. Anyway, it's good that you could call round tonight. It would have been even better if we could have managed to meet yesterday, but timings can never be perfect. Because yesterday, the 3rd of January, was, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien's, Professor Tolkien's birthday. He was born in, I think it was 1898 or something. It was about 133 years ago or so. He was born on the 3rd of January. And it's become a custom among quite a few people to raise a glass on that day, on the 3rd, and just stand and say, the Professor. But needless to say, raising a glass involves other pleasures as well, and quite often there'll be bits of reading. So I thought, though we're a day after the event, it's a sort of unexpected party as an addendum to a long expected party. I thought we could just think what an immense amount of good in the world Tolkien has done. And the paradox that he's done that immense amount of good in the world precisely by writing stories that are, as it were, not of this world, and yet fully reflect their kind of kindled elven light upon it. And I thought I'd share with you another favourite passage from The Lord of the Rings. By the way, the pipe, I just thought it was appropriate to the evening. This particular Peterson pipe is actually known as the Professor. It's one in their Sherlock Holmes series rather than the Tolkien series, but I thought as we're remembering the Professor, it was good to smoke this particular pipe. It's a really lovely, full, bowled pipe. You can make a whole evening of one bowl, really. Anyway, I thought that I'd read you one of the passages of poetry and song that are interspersed throughout The Lord of the Rings, and indeed The Hobbit. My first encounter with Tolkien was my father reading The Hobbit to me, not only doing the trolls in Yorkshire accents, but singing all the songs. I can remember him, making up tunes to them, far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to seek our long-forgotten gold. I can remember the tune still. Anyway, I read The Lord of the Rings. He started us off on The Lord of the Rings, but sort of realised it would be better if we read on by ourselves. We were old enough to, more than old enough to read well for ourselves then, so we did. But I was delighted to find more of these songs and poems interspersed. But they're not interspersed randomly. And there's a particular moment in the Fellowship of the Ring. It's one of the first moments of really dire danger and building dread. It's the chapter called A Knife in the Dark. It's when, having made their way away from Bree and gone through all the difficult lands, they find this hill, Weathertop, which itself speaks of a more ancient time and a different kingdom, and the kingdom in which, part of which, in some ways, as we discover later, Aragorn, whom they call Strider, is an inheritor. But they can feel the darkness brooding. The riders are coming for Frodo. And it's the occasion on which they start thinking about, as it were, the whole of their backstory. And even, the hobbits, and of all the hobbits, Sam Gamgee, turns out to be one who can remember a scrap of the old poetry as Bilbo taught it to him. And they're all discussing these things, and suddenly Sam comes up with those lines about Gil-galad, which is part of the ancient backstory. Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star in Mordor, where the shadows are. And of course the mention of Mordor brings back to them the sense of where their quest may lead them. And Strider very properly says, well, let's not have stories of Mordor, let's have stories of something fair and free and beautiful. And so he tells them in poetry part of the story of Beren and Luthien, which goes right back a couple of ages, and where the enemy is not Sauron, who is a mere servant of Morgoth, but Morgoth himself. But Aragorn at that stage doesn't choose to tell them the darker parts of that story, but tells them the beautiful moment when Beren, who is a man, comes upon Tinuviel, which is one of the many names for Luthien, Tinuviel being the Elvish for nightingale. He comes across her dancing and singing in a wood and falls in love. And in a very beautiful poem, Aragorn Strider tells their story. He recites the poem, and he recites the poem as the dark is building and the fire is going down. And it stirs their hearts. And in the midst of oppression, it reminds them of beauty. It reminds them of the everlasting beauty, because Luthien, Tinuviel, is very much associated with the stars and starlight. And it seems to me to show something of the very function of poetry, that poetry brings you this breath of the eternal, this glimpse of a shimmering and unsullied beauty, even in the midst of the shadows with which we contend. And God knows our world is shadowed enough. So I thought I'd read you that. And of course, you'll know that there's a deeper resonance still, because of course the story of Beren and Luthien, of a man who falls in love with an elf maiden, and of an elf maiden who chooses the first and alone of all her kind to forsake her immortality and become mortal for the sake of love, which is in a sense an anticipation almost of the grace of God, the eternal choosing to die. That story, as we come to know much later, is echoed in the actual story of Aragorn and Arwen. So there's something extraordinary going on there. And indeed, it has a deeper resonance still, because when Tolkien and his deeply beloved wife Edith were buried side by side, he simply had Beren on his stone and Luthien on hers. So it's got huge resonances. Anyway, let's just hear it for the fun of it. I will tell you the tale of Tinuviel, said Strider, in brief, for it is a long tale, of which the end is not known, and there are none now except Elrond that remembers it aright, as it was told of old. It is a fair tale that is sad, though it is sad, as are all the tales of Middle-earth. Yet it may lift up your hearts. I hope it'll lift up yours as well as mine. He was silent for a time, and then he began, not to speak, but to chant softly. The leaves were long, the grass was green, the hemlock umbels tall and fair, and in the glade a light was seen of stars in shadows shimmering. Tinuviel was dancing there to music of a pipe unseen, and light of stars was in her hair and in her raiment glimmering. There Beren came from mountains cold, and lost he wandered under leaves, and where the elven river rolled, he walked alone and sorrowing. He peered between the hemlock leaves, and saw, in wonder, flowers of gold upon her mantle and her sleeves, and her hair like shadow following. Enchantment healed his weary feet that over hills were doomed to roam, and forth he hastened strong and fleet, and grasped at moonbeams glistening. Through woven woods in elven home she lightly fled on dancing feet, and left him lonely still to roam in the silent forest listening. He heard there oft the flying sound of feet as light as linden leaves, or music welling underground in hidden hollows quavering. Now withered lay the hemlock sheaves, and one by one with sighing sound, whispering fell the beechen leaves in the wintry woodland wavering. He sought her ever, wandering far, where leaves of years were thickly strewn, by light of moon and ray of star in frosty heaven shivering. Her mantle glinted in the moon, as on a hilltop high and far she danced, and at her feet was strewn a mist of silver quivering. When winter passed, she came again, and her song released the sudden spring, like rising lark and falling rain and melting water bubbling. He saw the elven flowers spring about her feet, and healed again, he longed by her to dance and sing upon the grass untroubling. Again she fled, but swift he came, Tinuviel, Tinuviel. He called her by her elvish name, and there she halted, listening. One moment stood she, and a spell his voice laid on her. Beren came, and doom fell on Tinuviel, that in his arms lay glistening. As Beren looked into her eyes, within the shadow of her hair, the trembling starlight of the skies he saw there mirrored, shimmering. Tinuviel, the elven fair, immortal maiden elven wise, about him cast her shadowy hair, and arms like silver glimmering. Long was the way that fate them bore, o'er stony mountains cold and grey, through halls of iron and darkling door, and woods of nightshade morrowless. The sundering seas between them lay. Yet, at the last, they met once more, and long ago they passed away, in the forest, singing, sorrowless. Wonderful that the poem ends sorrowless. And of course, all that walking and wayfaring is what the hobbits and Strider have still to do. But the great thing is the desire, the longing that lifts Beren, and then the beauty of the meeting. And it's a blessing. It's a kind of lifting of the eyes beyond the veils of this world. It's a kind of shimmering of the eternal into the temporal, which gives them all hope. And of course, the next thing that happens is that the riders come and they've got to deal with the present evil. But they can do so all the better because of having had that wonderful poetic interlude. And anyway, it kind of, as part of my own vocation and why I'm a poet, I want to produce songs and poems like that. And I'm partly now poetically telling the stories of Arthur, not because I think they're old and irrelevant, but on the contrary, because I think we need these ancient tales to encourage us, even in the midst of the present darkness. Anyway, so seeing as we missed it last time, let's, it should have been yesterday really, but let's stand and in the light of all he's had to offer us, drink a toast to the Professor. So you raise your glass too, and we'll say, the Professor. And thanks for dropping round.